Chapter 176, The Minister's Confession. Zhang Sha found something missing halfway through. It's just that since he bumped into Zhang Xuning, he didn't feel like he belonged, and he couldn't tell when he started to disappear, and whether he was lost on the way back, or in the Linzi Palace. So he went and returned. Zhang Xuning was no longer in the empty garden, and the pavilion was empty, only the messy cups and plates left by the two attendants in the pavilion. Seeing that Zhang was gone and returned, the attendant who had served him before had some impression of him, stepped forward and bowed, and took the initiative to ask, "Master Zhang, what's wrong, but what has fallen?" Zhang Sha asked, "Have you ever seen a bag?" The attendant was stunned for a moment. "Is it the appearance of the silver veins on the bottom of the suandi?" Zhang Sha said, "Have you seen it?" The attendant waved his hand again and again, but his eyes became a little strange, and his expression was also a little difficult, and he hesitated for a moment before he said, "I saw that it was a mistake, but when I came here to clean up, I saw that the daughter of Zhang Shilang's family was standing here, holding a bag, which is somewhat similar to what you are looking for." She looked at the little ones didn't dare to go up and ask more. Zhang Sha stood in front of the steps, in a trance. The waist is missing the bag, and it is a little empty. The attendant then felt that the expression of the young court official in front of him overlapped for a moment with the second girl Zhang he had seen before, a strange and swaying heaviness, like a mirror under the dark water, making the refracted light look dim. It was a long time before Zhang Sha spoke. He asked, "Is Miss Zhang gone?" The attendant nodded and said, "Yes, it seems that I have already returned to the house with Lord Zhang." Zhang Sha closed his eyes slightly, was silent for a moment, and then said thank you. The attendant was puzzled, but he did not dare to ask more. When I bowed down again, I looked up and saw the adult walking out along the garden path, clearly warm and intoxicating summer night. When the back gradually disappeared at the end of the light under the cascading corridor, it seemed to be walking in the cold autumn frost. The day before yesterday, there was a rain, which washed away the floating dust that shrouded the capital, and the pavement of the long street was also washed clean by the rain. The sound of cars and horses died down. Then the sound of footsteps on the road became obvious, empty, and deserted. Zhang Sha seemed to think about everything in his mind, and he didn't seem to think about anything. The place where he lived was quite a distance from the mansions of the princes and nobles, and after this place where every inch of land was valuable, the height of the pavilions on both sides was lowered, and gradually some laughter and shouting sounded. This morning, he accidentally knocked over the teapot at home, and his mother told him to remember to buy a new one when he came back. Zhang Sha entered the porcelain shop that closed late, and chose a simple set of white porcelain tea sets from Xinjiao, but listened to the shopkeeper of the porcelain shop sigh as he accompanied a yak standing in front of Duo Baoj. King wine, drunken hometown wine, the glaze is bright and thin, and it is called the thin bone of plum. It's a pity that Boss Joe's plum bottle is broken, and I have found many skilled craftsmen to repair it, but I can only stop there. From a distance, it's like a new bottle. You can't get close. If you look at this neck, the seams are subtle, and it is difficult for a skilled craftsman to fill in the old marks. After all, it is broken, your cherished love, and you will have to take care of it more carefully in the future, otherwise a little bump will have to fall apart, and it cannot be compared with bridging as new, just out of the kiln when it is integrated. Alas. Zhang Sha looked at that grid. A foot-high plum bottle stood in the middle, azure as jade, delicate fetal quality, and natural beauty. But there are tiny cracks on it, which are left after repair, like scars that have been worn away by time but are always difficult to erase. The guy in front of the counter glanced at him. "Does child also want to buy a plum bottle?" Zhang Shike slowly retracted his gaze and said, "No need." The money was paid, and the tea set was brought home. Zhang's mother knew that he was going to the banquet today, and she was afraid that he would inevitably have a banquet and drink too much wine, so she prepared a decanting soup and heated it, and when she saw him coming back, she just served it to him. John covered his heart for a while. For a moment, he even felt all kinds of depression, but in the end, he still lowered his voice and said to John, "It's too late to come back, and my mother is worried about it. You don't have good bones, so you might as well go to bed early." How can it be said that he is also the son raised by himself? How can the Zhang family not see that he is preoccupied? For several days in a row, he has been going out early and returning late, and he has not finished his official business in the Yamen, and it is just a matter of saying that there are indeed many complicated things, but looking at his appearance, it seems that he does not want to think about anything except official business, but it is more like using this to suppress something. But he has a lot of ideas since he was a child, and he buries everything in his heart. Zhang didn't know much about his affairs, and now that he looked like he had nothing to do, he knew that he wouldn't say anything if he asked, so he simply didn't ask, and only said, "Even if your father didn't have any interest in you back then, he will definitely be blind if he has knowledge. My mother just hopes that you will be calmer, and it would be good to meet a girl you like and start a family. As for glory and wealth, although it is good, you have to chase it, but you have to chase it, but you are very tired of yourself." Zhang Sha did not explain. Zhang sighed, and withdrew from this ordinary study, telling him to go to bed early, and then close the door. He brought back many files from the criminal department to read them. Now it's all stacked high on the desk. The flame of the lamp on the side swayed gently, lying on the paper according to the lines of ink, but it could not enter the bottom of the eye. Zhang Sha felt that the light was dazzling, so he moved the lamp farther away. And then the words on the paper were darkened. He sat behind the desk, like the ink on the inkstone on the desk, which was gradually drying up, and he didn't move for a night. The early summer light comes early. The voices in the market were noisy again. Zhang woke up early in the morning and cooked porridge, thinking that Zhang Sha had already gone to court before dawn as usual, so he planned to clean up the room and tidy up the courtyard before the weather got hot. Who would have thought that he would be in front of the door of his bedroom, so he put his hand on it, and the door opened. The bed was neatly made and pillowed, and it was clear that no one had slept last night. When I turned my head again, the door of the study was closed. It was not yet dawn, and there was still a little light coming through it. She hesitated, then knocked lightly in front of the door. "Aren't you going to the court today?" Zhang Sha's body sitting behind the desk moved slightly, as if he had finally been pulled back from some dark and lonely place, but he said slowly, "I won't go today." He never delayed the day when the court called for a big upsurge. Yesterday did not say that today is a day off. Zhang Shi was stunned for a long time, and then said, "Then I'll go to the market to buy some vegetables, and then go to the yamen after breakfast." She packed her things and went out, carrying a small bamboo basket. The morning market is the time to live. Pick a 2-pound black carp, buy some tender ginger, chives, leeks, and fresh tofu, and finally choose a piece of pork shoulder meat that looks good, put it in a bamboo basket, and go home. When I went to the market, it was still dark. When I returned, the morning light was already dim. It's just that when Zhang turned around the familiar alley and saw the old courtyard of his house, he suddenly found that there was a young girl standing under the mossy steps. Wearing a moon-white wide-sleeved fairy dress, her face was facing the sky, her complexion looked pale in the morning light, she raised her head slightly, and seemed to be a little sluggish looking at the mottled wooden door. "It's early in the morning." Zhang hesitated, walked over, and asked with a smile, "This girl, are you looking for someone?" Zhang Xuning turned around and realized that she had stood for a long time. She saw Zhang, an ordinary-looking woman, who had gone through the wind and frost of raising her son alone, which left deeper marks on her face than that of women of the same age, with frosty white temples and fine wrinkles. In the bamboo basket in the crooked arm is the fresh vegetables that have just been bought. At this time, he looked at himself with a little worry, but his eyebrows were very kind. He should hate himself. There is only one family in the depths of this alley. Zhang Xuning has already guessed the identity of this woman, and the guilt in her heart is surging like a hot spring, barely laughing, but tears are still falling. She said, "Excuse me, is this the family of Master Zhang of the criminal department?" But he had come to find his son of wood. Zhang Shi saw such a fairy-like and glamorous girl, and she didn't think about Zhang Sha at all. It can be seen that she shed tears before she said a word, and remembered Zhang Sha's unusual things last night and this morning, and muttered in his heart for a while, "That kid Elm Pimple can't move, don't provoke other girls and make people sad, right? When I was in Henan, I was fine, but I didn't learn well in the capital. If he really does something lacking in morality, see that she doesn't ask for family law, and beat him up for his short-lived father." Yes, here it is. Zhang Shi couldn't help but be in a hurry, and hurriedly said, "He didn't go to court today, he is in the study, you can please come in first, and I will call him for you." She stepped forward and opened the door and asked Zhang Xuning to enter. Then he forgot to put down the bamboo basket he was carrying, and he was going to knock on the door of the study that had not been opened that night and let Zhang cover it out. Before she could walk up the steps, the door that had been closed opened unexpectedly. Zhang covered his hand and stood in the door. Mo Ian's robe hung on him, although it was still straight, it gave people a sense of silence. He quietly looked at Zhang Xuning standing in this humble courtyard, and after a long time, he said, "Second Miss Zhang, please come in." Zhang Xuning also looked at him for a long time before walking up the steps. When he arrived at the door, Zhang Sha gave way in. She entered the house. Zhang Shike explained to Zhang Shi, turned around and closed the door. Two people who hadn't slept all night sat down facing each other. The tea was aged last night and was already cold. On the bookcase full of files, a wisp of green smoke floated at the end of the wick of the lamp, which had burned out. The rising sun shone obliquely from the east on the low lacquer table in front of the window, dispelling a bit of cold. Zhang Xuning stared at him. Zhang Sha lowered his gaze. She said softly, "Today should be the morning, but Lord Zhang is at home, as if he knows that I will come. Is he waiting for me?" Zhang Sha was silent. Zhang Xuning folded her hands on her kneeling laps, was calm, and laughed. "I once confessed that I belonged to Lord Zhang, but Lord Zhang said that I already belonged to my heart. That day, I was in a trance, and I didn't admit defeat at all, so I forgot to ask. I don't know who this girl is that adults like." The palm under Zhang Sha's case was quietly clenched. He said, "People in the capital are just ordinary people. Zhang Sha can also lie, and he will also deceive people." Zhang Xuning blinked, and asked again. Soon after Zhang Dake and Miss Yao divorced, he empathized with this person. Although he is an ordinary family, he should not be bad in appearance, and his temperament is also above me, right? Zhang covered it for a while before saying, "Second Miss Zhang is impeccable, but she is from a humble background, and she doesn't dare to mistake the girl for life. Her talent and appearance cannot be compared with that of a girl, and her temperament is not very good, but she..." Zhang Xuning asked, "Just what?" Zhang Sha finally raised his eyes to look at her, restrained and patient, but his heart was extremely desolate, staring at her pupils, as if he wanted to say that this face was engraved into his heart, and said slowly, "It's just that I love her." Zhang Xuning burst out laughing. "Then what's her name?" Zhang Sha was speechless. Zhang Xuning suddenly hated him, and couldn't even hang up that little fake smile. He only put the bag that had been hidden in his sleeve for a long time and had been reading it all night on the table, and the thin page was unfolded and pressed on the bag, and said, "Lord Zhang can't say it, I'll tell you, okay." Zhang Sha closed his eyes. Zhang Suining said word by word, almost ruthlessly, and said to him with red eyes, "The person you like is not as good looking, so bad, not a good person, her surname is Zhang, and her name is Zhang Suining. I intend to turn my heart to the bright moon." On that page, the ink blot, which is rare to be correct, has penetrated, but it is not old. But Zhang Sha's heart is full of holes. Zhang Suining stubbornly asked, "How can you say that you don't like me? How dare you say you don't like me?" Zhang Sha then remembered his previous life. She is fresh, she is bright, she is flamboyant, and she is wanton. At that time, he couldn't restrain that arrogant heart and wanted to get close to her. Can be finally. The jade mountain is tilted, and the brocade screen is broken. The heart in his chest seemed to have been cut out by her sharp words, and the blood was drenched on the tip of the knife, and 1,000 kinds of bitterness poured into his throat, and fell back again, full of sour and astringent. The plum bottle has been broken in the end. He looked at her, as if he had looked at her from his previous life to this life, and finally called her in a low voice, "Niang Niang." Empress. The person in front of him, how could he call her Niang Niang? Zhang Suining first felt a kind of confusion, and then swayed dizzy. The faint words of the voice passed from her ears to her heart. The shade in front of him swayed gently, and the sunlight shining in was pale, and there seemed to be a fog rising in the room, making everything around him blurry and even rumbling. She subconsciously shook her head. How so? I must have heard it wrong. But there was a voice in his heart that was smiling coldly, "I know, you should have known. You have only known each other for a long time in this life. Why does he have a deep affection for you, and he likes you but still hides it from you? You heard you right?" A heartache, coupled with endless guilt, bound her and made her sit down. At this moment, everything is understood. It was as if there was a high mountain, a sinking abyss, crushing her, letting her fall. She couldn't bear it, buried her head to cover her face, and wept uncontrollably. Zhang Sha walked over without a word, only to feel like the cruel executioner, breaking her last line of defense. The convergence of past and present lives is like a torrent. He half knelt beside her, his Adam's apple rolled slightly, and finally allowed himself to trespass at this moment, gently hugged her into his arms, and said, "It's not good to be a minister, it's not good to be a minister." She cried, "You didn't tell me a long time ago, you lied to me." Zhang Sha said, "It was the minister who deceived you." Zhang Suining hated herself, recalling her previous questioning, and only felt that she was ridiculous. Where is she worthy? Her tears fell on Zhang Sha's chest, wetting the placket of his clothes, soaking his heart in it, and making him confirm that he really shouldn't tell her. "Niang Niang, the minister is also afraid. I'm afraid you know that the one in front of you is Zhang Sha from the previous life. Once known, the past will come back one after another, giving birth to endless guilt. She wants to be free, she wants to get what she wants. But this guilt is enough to crush and knock down a person who has gradually left the past. All the people she met were new, but he was her old bond. And the chasm that has been torn apart by the too heavy past, even if both of them want to try their best to fill it, how can it be bridged? How tiring should you be to live like that?" When she was in front of him, she didn't look like the real her at all. Chapter 177, Love in the End. The round wooden stick is rolled out on the cutting board, and with the skillful rotation of one hand, the dough slowly becomes translucent under the pulling and squeezing. Zhang wanted to simply serve a pot of wontons. But as she rolled her dough, she heard a cry from the other end of the study, and she was stunned for a moment, and she couldn't help but be a little worried, and looked out the window with some hesitation. This piece of wood in his own house had almost no intersection with women in the past. That second girl Zhang. Isn't it the one who has something to do with him as rumored to be? At that time, Zhang thought it was a rumor. The neighbors joked, and she only said, if there is really something to do with that kid's dull temperament, he should have liked someone early in the morning, and he will marry home sooner or later. Unexpectedly, the girl came to the door. Looking at his depressed appearance, he cares very much about other girls, but his lukewarm attitude makes her angry when she sees it, and she seems to have swallowed Coptus chinensis. I don't know what I said, and it caused people to cry. Zhang Shi looked at the girl as pleasing to the eye, and didn't think about whether the girl was not good to her son, but wondered if the son was stinky and hard, and he didn't open up at all. Water was boiled on the stove. The dough is also rolled out. She counted the hours, afraid that the girl inside would not eat when she came in the morning, and it was not good to go in and ask more, so she simply packed a few more wontons, pinched them one by one, and threw them in after the water boiled. The crying in the study was quiet after a while. Zhang Xuning sat on the ground, hugging her knees. Her eyes fell on the corners of Zhang Zhan's cold-colored sleeve robe, and she only felt that fate was tricking people. I used to think that being born again would save everything and start over. But how can you imagine? The person she cares about the most and doesn't want to hurt the most also returns with her memories. When she cried, Zhang Sha didn't say a word, just stayed by her side, letting the cry tear his heart and lungs, giving him a strong feeling of survival in the world. Only pain and suffering are the deepest. It is only when facing her that those vivid joys, sorrows, greed, hatred and resentments that have been deeply suppressed under the cold shell will climb up, making him feel that he can't extricate himself day by day. It's just that I can't control my own price, but it's too tragic. Even thinking about it seems to be covered with a layer of blood. In the middle of the day and night, she lowered her eyebrows, lowered her posture, pulled his sleeve, lied to him and said that she would be a good person from now on, and only begged him to help her. Danger lurks in the court. Xiao Shu is pregnant, she is fighting fiercely with Xiao Shi, she is too deep, in that position, she can't get out, and losing means death. Zhou Yinzi is her confidant. Ruthless and selfish. Whether it was out of law or reason, he had no reason to let this person go. It is necessary to take advantage of the fact that the other party has formed a party for personal gain and sold his official position to be dug up, and he will be wiped out, so as to live up to his many years of governing the law and living an upright life. But on the day of the trial of the three divisions, he sat high in the hall, looked at the evidence on the file, and put pen to paper, but he couldn't leave it for a long time. Once convicted, Zhou Yinzi can certainly be removed, but Zhang Xuning is deeply bound to this person. Zhou Yin's fall is equivalent to her death. He is not only judging the case, but also her life and death. That was the first time that Zhang Sha couldn't write in the nearly 10 years since he joined the court as an official, and it was also the only time he showed favoritism. And then there was no return. He will never forget that in the prison wafted with the smell of stale and blood, the jailer who knew him well could not bear to bear it, and quietly handed him the wound medicine to inform him of his mother's death. At first hearing that he was in prison, Zhang was heartbroken, but he wanted to defend himself, beat all the drums of injustice in the Yamen, and cried and said to people, I know the son I raised, he can't do such a thing. He is a clean official, he is a good official, and he swore an oath to his father's spiritual position. But no one paid attention. She was left unattended at home, fell down the stairs in the morning, and never got up again. It took 7 or 8 days for the neighbors to discover the anomaly, and they took a ladder to climb the wall and look into the yard. Knocked open the courtyard gate and entered, and the person was already. Zhang Sha never dared to think about that scene. As a minister, he is disloyal. As a son of man, he is not filial. Not to mention filial piety in front of his mother's funeral was still helped by his colleagues in the court who braved the disapproval of the world, but he, a son who received his mother's favor, couldn't even go out to send it to the end. Jiang Xuning sat down, motionless, and asked him in frustration, Master Jiang, you should hate me, right? Jiang Sha said, hate. Jiang Xuning said, it should be so. Jiang Sha was silent for a while, and then said slowly, but how can I hate you? I am the one who is unfaithful, and I am the one who is unfilial, I am the one who loves you, and it is I who harms you. In the end, I had to resent myself. Niang, where is Jiang Sha so good? He has lost his mind for you, betrayed his principles, disregarded the law, and become a mediocre and dumb ordinary man in this muddy world. Don't worry about him anymore, he's just a coward who doesn't dare to love anymore, he's not worth it. Jiang Xuning hugged her knees, shook her head and choked, no, it's me who doesn't deserve. It's that she's so bad. Being in the abyss, coveting his exaltation, jealous of his integrity, she stretched out her hand and dragged him down from the top of a high mountain, into a bottomless hell, and ruined everything for him, even if she wanted to pay for it with her life, how could she pay it back? Between them, there is a gap between good and bad, disobedience and loyalty, as well as the prison disaster that should not have been, the cruel punishment, and even the living human life. Even if they are all born again, what can they do? Those pasts were so painful and tragic that even she had to be sad and uneasy when she dreamed back at midnight, and Jiang Sha accidentally remembered how painful it would be. Fairy couples will also quarrel. Even if she and Jiang are together, how do you know that he will not expose each other's scars because of some unhappiness, or inadvertently hurt at a certain moment? Both of them remember the past, too fragile. Jiang Xuning said, you don't want me to know, you are also reborn, you don't want me to feel guilty, may I be at ease. But what I love is you. How can I stop chasing you, not coming after you? I was at ease, thinking that I could start all over again, and I wanted to break the casserole and ask for the end. Unexpectedly, it made all your efforts in vain. You know me too well, Jiang Sha. Jiang Sha was speechless. Jiang Xuning felt that she had never been so sad. You are not a coward, I am. If two people want to be together, how can Jiang Sha hide such a secret from her for the rest of her life? When the time comes, how will she bear it? But if you told her earlier, how could she love him, miss him, and chase him with peace of mind and without shame? How she treated Xie Wei in her previous life, how she would treat Zhang Wei in this life. In her previous life, she was a high-ranking queen, but Xie Wei knew that she was just a country girl who was vulgar and knew nothing because she went to Beijing with her back then. So she was disgusted with Xie Wei. If it weren't for his high position and power, or if he might have found a reason to demote him out of Beijing, he wouldn't want to think of the past that he didn't want to look back on. In this life, she wants to be a good person again, but Jiang Sha, who was reborn, has seen all her bad and all unbearable. She obviously loved this person, but she caused him to be imprisoned, his widowed mother died, and his reputation was ruined. When I see him, I feel that I am bad, and when I think of him, I will be ashamed. How can I bear the torment and be willing to see him all the time? Is disgusted with Xie Wei. I am ashamed of Jiang Sha. But there is no difference in essence. She is unwilling to face the unbearable self in the past, and she does not dare to take even a step closer to Jiang Sha. Jiang Xuning raised her head and looked at him, only to find that the cold face in front of her, this pair of calm eyes, was indeed no different from the previous life. There is also his handwriting in general with the following. There were so many clues, but she didn't find them at all. But a fear suddenly came to his heart. Jiang Xuning's long eyelashes were soaked with tears, her voice trembled, and she asked him, no, it's not right. On that day, they forced the palace, and those clear streams in the court wrote to me to be buried and hand over the jade seal of the country. I promised, Xie Wei also promised me, I won't kill you, how can you be like me? How could he be reborn like her? At this moment, the hatred in her heart suddenly came out, her body tightened, and she immediately wanted to get up. He broke his promise, Siejuan, he broke his trust in me. However, a wide and powerful palm gently pulled her down. Zhang Sha silently raised his eyes. I only thought of the words that day when the Taishi, who had overthrown the government and the opposition and cleared the Liu He, came to his cell where no one cared about him, and the wind and clouds seemed to say it lightly. He stared at Zhang Xuning. The hand was still holding her hand. After a long time, he slowly said, no. Siejuan did not lose his promise. Zhang Xuning was stunned for a moment and looked at Zhang Sha from a high place. At the bottom of those clear eyes, her figure was reflected. But her mind was a mess. Until a thought crossed her mouth, her throat was like a block sand and a knife, tears rolled down her cheeks, and she said bitterly, you. If Siejuan didn't break his trust in her, then there was only one possibility. Zhang Sha said quietly, the state has laws, and the family has rules. The prince broke the law, and the crime was the same as that of the common people. Zhang Sha is a sinner, and the verdict has been written, the crime is determined by the law, and the punishment is punished by the law. I have been wrong enough, and I deserve to be punished, so how can I be spared? No one could bear to write a verdict for him. So he wrote it himself. The charges and laws should be completed and punished after the autumn. Pushed onto the torture platform, the sky and the earth were vast, the guillotine fell, the body was in a different place, and the blood was splashed 3 feet. Zhang Xuning finally couldn't stand firmly, sat down again, and looked out the window in a daze. Oh, yes. That's a cover. She used her old favor to coerce her and ask her to let Zhang Sha go, but Zhang Sha ruled the law all his life, and how could she be ashamed of others? Since she wrote down her own verdict in her own hand, she confessed her guilt, and even if what was put in front of him was life and death, he would choose the latter. That's why she likes him. Zhang Xuning suddenly felt so tired, blinked his eyes, and then asked, Xie Wei later got what he wanted and ascended the throne and became the emperor, right? It's not so much a question as an emotion. After all, Siejuan has such a strong ability, destroying the Xiao family, punishing the royal family, dyeing half of the capital with blood, and finally getting the jade seal of the country. How easy is it to ascend to the throne? Unexpectedly, Zhang Xiao was silent for a long time, and actually said, no. Zhang Xuning suspected that she had misheard. She looked at Zhang Sha. Zhang Sha remembered what he had heard in his previous life from prison to the autumn decision, but said, it's all over. Mother, those answers are no longer important. Zhang Xuning was in a trance like a dream. Zhang had already cooked the wontons, hesitated, and knocked on the door from afar. Zhang Xuning hurriedly got up, only to feel embarrassed. She really had no shame to face this woman who had died in her family in her previous life. She didn't dare to stay longer, and she wiped her tears and was about to leave. But Zhang Sha grabbed her and said to her, stay, let's have breakfast together, my mother should cook one more person. A bowl of ordinary wontons, although the dough is rolled thin, it does not use any precious ingredients, but it is minced meat, mixed with pepper, and minced ginger. After cooking, put it in a bowl, sprinkle with chopped green onions, and lightly add some dried shrimp and rice vinegar. The bowl is also just an ordinary porcelain bowl. Serve it to the table and heat up a white gas. Zhang Xuning sat at the table with Zhang Sha and Zhang like a puppet, picked up the chopsticks, but had a feeling of not knowing where he was. Zhang Shi looked at the two from time to time, but he was worried that this well-dressed girl would not be used to eating such coarse things, and was a little restrained. I didn't know that there were guests coming, so I bought fish and came back. It took too much time to cook. I wrapped a bowl of wontons in a daze, and I really didn't get on the table. Jiang Xuning had a sour account in her heart. With hazy teary eyes in the mist, she only said, "No, the things made by my aunt are delicious." Jiang Sha sat next to her, silent. Ordinary people, people in the market, fireworks curling up. But there is no place without the warmth of the veins. After drinking a sip of hot soup, he ironed it in his heart. Jiang Xuning vaguely understood why he kept himself to eat this meal. He wanted her to be relieved. I ate the wontons one by one in my mouth, and the more I ate them, the more tears fell down. Jiang Sha knew that she was used to eating and not getting tired of eating small and eating more, and she loved to toss those cooks in the palace, and the amount of food was never large. But she didn't stop eating most of the bowl. He had a hidden anger in his heart for no reason. He couldn't see her being so embarrassed and belittled herself, so he stretched out his hand and took away her bamboo chopsticks, put them aside, but when he spoke, his heart was so soft that he was confused, and he only said in a low voice, "Enough, don't eat any more." Jiang Xuning pressed her heart tightly, but she felt that it was difficult to face it. Jiang Shi saw the clue, hurriedly put down the dishes and chopsticks and said, "Yes, our small family does not have so many rules. I was worried that the girl would come early in the morning and be hungry, so I added more. If you can't finish eating, you can put it aside, there is nothing rude. It's fine that she doesn't speak." As soon as she spoke, Jiang Xuning couldn't cry. Jiang Shi was in a hurry. "Ouch, don't cry, don't cry. I know that this piece of wood in my house went early since my father, withdrawn and unlikable, and although I studied with him, no one taught him how to please girls. Girl, don't cry, if you have been wronged, tell me, see if I don't look back to repair him." Jiang Xuning cried and laughed. "Master Jiang is bad." Jiang Sha looked at her quietly, his heart like a knife. Jiang Shi didn't know about the grievances between them, so he immediately glanced sideways, and said, "You tell your aunt, don't be bored in your heart, where is there any obstacle in this world that you can't get over? I asked him to apologize to you." Jiang Xuning looked at Jiang Sha and said lightly, "Lord Jiang is too good, and you are too good." Jiang Shi was stunned. Jiang Xuning knew that she had been here long enough, stood up, and only bowed deeply to the Jiang family. Her eyes washed with tears were exceptionally clear, and said, "Thank you aunt for your hospitality, I didn't inform my family when I came out, it's time to leave." Jiang Shi didn't know why. Jiang Sha said, "I'll send you." He walked ahead, pulled the deadbolt, and opened the courtyard door. Jiang Xuning walked out with him. The hustle and bustle of the world suddenly came to my face. She stood for a long time, then suddenly turned around and hugged Jiang Sha, tightly, closed her eyes in his chest, "Just hold for a while." Jiang Sha didn't move after all. Jiang Xuning said, "Master Jiang, you are so good, how can I forget you in the future?" Jiang Sha replied, "Meet a better one." Jiang Xuning was aggrieved, "You lied to me, there is no better than you." Jiang Sha was silent, and only said after a while, "Then I will meet a more suitable one." Jiang Xuning coveted this temperature. Even in the previous life, she never got so close, because she was the queen and he was a courtier. In this life, she was clearly the closest, but it was also the farthest, because they didn't have the courage to love each other when nothing happened in the bloody past. She smiled, "What I like is suitable, if not, where is the suitable? What about more appropriate?" Jiang Sha was speechless for a long time. Jiang Xuning raised her head, but said, "If you bow your head, I will tell you a secret." Jiang Sha looked at her for a long time, and lowered his head as he said. She stood on tiptoe and gently pecked him on the brow with infinite affection. This time, it was she who trespassed him. Then he took 3 steps back and smiled quietly, "No matter what you think, in fact, when I met you from the summer resort, I wanted to possess you when I saw that you didn't know what to do, and I would rather go out in the rain. Why can't such an incomprehensible court official be of use to me? It's just a pity that I was moved, and you didn't win. That's why I belong to you, not because you saved me, protected me, or because I was ashamed, but because I fell in love at first sight. She thought Zhang Xia would be stunned. Unexpectedly, he looked at her with a pulse, and even smiled, and said slowly, I know. At this moment, 1,000 feelings were really intertwined with the bottom of my heart, flowing endlessly, but in the end it became brilliant. She tilted her head and didn't want to shed any more tears. Pretended not to care and snorted, it looks so good when you laugh, but in previous years, you were very stingy with me, and you didn't even give me a good face. I'm leaving. Zhang Xia said, okay. Zhang Xuning said again, although there are few girls in the world who are better than this palace allows you to find a girl who is not so good. Don't treat yourself badly, and marry Kexen when you look at it. Zhang Xia also said, okay. But he didn't tell her, there are many girls in the world who are better than you, but I don't love them, and I don't want to marry. Zhang Xuning finished speaking, and then said again, I'm really leaving. Zhang Xia still said, okay. Zhang Xuning scolded him, I don't understand the amorous feelings, it's stinky and hard, and it's a piece of rotten wood. Whoever likes you is unlucky, confused, and blind. Zhang didn't reply. Zhang Xuning stomped her feet and left. But Zhang Xia stood behind, and saw her stretching her body and walking out for more than a dozen steps, and when she poured the mouth of the alley, she finally didn't hold it up, her shoulders shrugged, she raised her hands and sleeves, and wiped her face. People who passed by looked at her in amazement. She walked all the way out of the alley, and her figure was pale by the skylight, and then she was gradually drowned out by human figures and voices. Zhang Xia's heart seems to have been hollowed out. Zhang Xi walked out of it, looked at it for a long time, looked at Zhang Xia who was standing in place, and said tentatively, I think, this girl is very good. Zhang Xia said silently, it's very good. But it wasn't his after all. Zhang Xi followed the direction he was looking, but he couldn't help but be at a loss. Chapter 178, Parting. Zhang Xuning went out early in the morning, and she didn't say hello to anyone, only when she came out, she was seen by the porter, but the porter wouldn't know where she went. If the family finds that she is missing, they will be anxious. But the matter of going to Shuzhong has already been negotiated with Zhang Boyu. If she returns home with this unruly appearance, it will inevitably make people worry about her current state, so that the plan to go to Shuzhong will not be able to come true. So she found a quiet place and sat for a long time, until she forced herself to calm down a little, and washed her face with water by the stream, and then forced her to return to the house without incident. Zhang Boyu heard that the person was missing early in the morning, and he didn't know where she was going. He reprimanded a few people in the house, and when he saw her coming back as if she was fine, his brows furrowed tightly, and he said solemnly, where did you go again? You didn't even say hello to your family, and you went to Shuzhong like this. How can you reassure people? Zhang Xuning actually had no intention of coping. But in this life, in addition to Zhang Xia, she also has things that she has to accomplish, and the mistake she made up for is that she did not show her flaws in front of Zhang Boyu, and only said, my daughter just remembered that she was about to leave the capital. In the end, there are some things that she is in love with, and some friends are no longer in the capital, so she took advantage of the morning market to go out alone, take a walk, and see if she wants to prepare some gifts for her old friends before leaving the capital. It was a whim, and it was the fault of my daughter, which made you worried. She looked like she was no different from usual, but she really didn't look very energetic. Zhang Boyu didn't know what had happened between her and Zhang Xia, and naturally there was no way to guess where she was going this morning, just when what she said was true. On other ladies, this reason is nonsense. put it on Jiang Swining's body, but it is reasonable. It's just that this remark also made Zhang Boyo sigh. Since you have a bit of affection, do you consider giving up going to Shuzhong? If you don't like to stay at home, then it is not impossible to find a satisfactory person to marry. Jiang Swining looked up at Zhang Boyo. Zhang Boyo wanted to mention this matter to her last night, but seeing that she was in a trance, she only talked about going to Shuzhong, and returned home before she could speak, so it was delayed to today. At yesterday's banquet, my father fell in love with a person with a good character, and I pondered that it was actually suitable for you. If it can be done, maybe it will be a good marriage. Jiang Swining didn't care about this, and shook her head. Zhang Boyo said, that acting director of the criminal department, Lord Zhang, also took good care of you when he heard about the Battle of Tongzhou, and although he looked silent, he was a reliable person. Yesterday, my father chatted with this person for a few words, but it was a rare clear stream in the court. You don't even think about it? Jiang Swining never expected that the person in Zhang Boyo's photo was Zhang Sha, and he had mixed feelings in his heart for a while, and he was bitter and desolate, and he couldn't cry or laugh. She slowly lowered her eyes. Cai said, Father is really bothered, but his daughter's intention to go to Shuzhong has been decided, and the matter has been arranged. And with such a domineering temperament of her daughter, it's better not to harm others. Please let my father dispel this thought. Zhang Boyo was suddenly helpless. Of course, he admires Zhang Sha, but Ning has no intention, and it is really difficult to force it. Originally, he didn't have much hope for this suggestion, and Jiang Swining's indifference was also expected by him. So I had to say, that's really no way. But after all, the mountains and rivers in Shuzhong are far away, and I am really worried about. My father is a squire of the household department, and he is in charge of the 6 departments. Lu Weining, the governor of Sichuan, is your fellow minister, and the prefect of Rongzhou has been favored by you in the past, and the above has been properly arranged. Jiang Swining has indeed never been to Shuzhong, but there is not much fear in her heart. There is also your daughter's old friend Yu Fangyan. She is married to the current director of the artesian well salt farm, and it should not be bad to have her to take care of her. On the other hand, I heard that Fan Yulan, the young lady of Fan Shangshu of the Ministry of Rights, was the one who went with me to choose a companion to read last year but was deposed because of poetry, and she has also arrived in Shu in the past few months and lives in Chengdu. If the daughter arrives there, she is not unaccompanied. Fan Yulan traveled all over the world after choosing a companion to read, and of course she had no friendship with Jiang Swining. But after all, this is the extraordinary person who set a precedent. A woman left the capital and traveled to write poems, and some poems have been circulated in recent months, which have become famous, and her father's official position is greater than Zhang Boyo's, and he is in Shuzhong, so he can naturally convince Zhang Boyo more. Zhang Boyo finally didn't say anything after thinking about it, and only said, since this is the case, then in the remaining 2 days, you will see if there are any old friends in Beijing to say goodbye to, so that you can talk. After all, you don't know how long it will take to come back. Jiang Swining said, yes. Just waiting for Zhang Bo to swim away, she sat under the flower stand outside her house, looking at the tall wooden hibiscus next to the courtyard wall. Spring is coming and summer is approaching, green leaves are growing, but there is not a single flower, and she remembered Yan Lin's smiling eyes when she climbed over the wall in a brocade dress and picked a wooden hibiscus and threw it into her arms. At that time, the high-spirited young man had not been stormy, the delicate princess was carefree, Yu Fangyan was still a poor concubine who was struggling to find a way out, and she had just been reborn, full of longing for everything and Zhang Sha. But nowadays, things are not people. The Yanji Marquis mansion was overturned, and the Yan family moved to Huangzhou. The Tatters and the pro-wolf son were ambitious, and the eldest princess of Liang went to Fanbang. Yu Fangyan was reborn and went to Shuzhong under the pretext of marrying Ren Ziwen, and all her happiness and longing were broken, and she was beaten bloody in this love and hatred with Zhang Sha, and she knew that the past was not as good as smoke. What else is worth remembering in this capital? Zhang Xuning couldn't think of it. If there was still a little melancholy, just because Zhang Sha was still in the capital, no matter whether she could let go of her feelings or not, the heavy love-hate entanglement in the past could only come to an end on this day. The last trace of reluctance was annihilated. She thought that she had never been so eager to leave this prosperous cage and go to the free mountains and rivers that she had longed for a long time. Families have already started packing. This matter was afraid of chaos in the middle, so it was not publicized. Zhang Xuning carefully sorted it out, calculating that his trip was not only his wish in his previous life, but also for him to be able to rescue the eldest princess of Liang smoothly one day, and the connections in the capital could not be wasted. For example, Fang Miao, Xiao Dingfei, and others, although they may not come in handy, it is better to do it than not to do it. So in the last 2 days, she asked people to prepare some gifts and send them to everyone's houses. Xiao Dingfei has been following Zhang Xuning to engage in wind and rain these days, and fully realized the happiness of doing whatever he wants and being lawless, taking advantage of Xiao's troubles and constantly falling into the well. He simply interpreted the words gentleman and her Zhonyang to the fullest, and when he was so happy that he couldn't extricate himself, he suddenly received Zhang Xuning's parting gift, and he was so shocked that he jumped 3 feet high. In the afternoon of the same day, he came to Jiang's mansion and pulled her sleeve to cry and grab the ground. I don't know how much of it is true, and how much of it is acting, and what nonsense is said in my mouth, such as who will I rely on after you leave, how can you leave me alone, what about covering me? But he didn't get entangled for long, and he was run over by Zhang Boyu, who rushed to the scene after hearing the news. Zhang Xuning didn't feel anything. Xiao Dingfei was not a kind of virtue who can bend and stretch, and people can do ghosts, and he can't suffer any big losses anywhere, so he doesn't take what he said seriously. It's just that when Xiao Dingfei left, she was a little hesitant. Everyone cooks well, but only one person makes it difficult for her. This person is Xie Wei. In the previous life, this person rebelled, killed all the royal family, punished the Xiao family, and stained the mountains and rivers with blood. Wan Niang just went. She was taken back to Beijing on the way to walk with this person. How much embarrassment was known by the other party, so she also avoided and hated. In this life, she changed her paranoid and obedient. She was obedient if she coaxed, and she coaxed her, but she became a teacher and student with him, and she had helped him and received help from the other party, but in addition to fear and disgust, she was a little more grateful. All kinds of emotions are intertwined, and it is really complicated. But no matter how complicated it is, Xie Wei in this world is her husband in the end, and he has a lot of intersections with her, and he is in the court. He wants him to take care of him in the court, attack the Tatars and rescue the eldest prince, so that he can mediate before and after. Anyone can ignore it, he can't ignore it. Anyone can confess, but he cannot confess. Zhang Xuning can bend and stretch, and Xie Wei in this life doesn't seem to be so terrible. Thinking about it, she decided to do what she liked, and simply went to the secluded pavilion. These days, Lucien's business is average, and he hasn't sold a few pianos, but there are frequent good news in Shuzhong, and Ren's salt farm is smooth, although he has sold silver stocks and bought a loss before, but now he can't help but smile when he sees the stock price slowly rising back. The boy in the fence house can also hear him humming 2 lines of song as he drinks tea. Not to mention how bright the mood is. In the early summer afternoon, after a half-hour nap, I was holding a good purple clay pot and walking around my piano hall. When I looked up and saw a guest coming, I was overjoyed. When you have to keep your eyes fixed on the person, your eyebrows are raised. Lucien laughed cunningly. Ouch, noble and rare, isn't this Zhang Er's girl? As soon as Zhang Xuning heard this, She knew that Lu Ziyin was still obsessed with the transaction of silver stocks in Ren's salt farm in the old days, and then she knew that she was like a fat sheep waiting to be slaughtered in the eyes of the other party. Is a good Duan Jinshi, the Prime Minister of Hanlin, how did he become this profiteer? Zhang Xuning didn't smile. By the piano. Lucien was a little disappointed for a moment, but after a while, he became excited again. That's good. I've been able to produce a few good pianos here in recent months. I've thought about it for a long time, and I've been playing the banana for more than half a year, so it's time to change. Come and take a look at these photos. The paint color is delicate, elegant, and dignified, just for everyone like you. The corners of Zhang Xuaning's mouth twitched slightly. This piano is not for women. Lucien let out an "oh," quickly turned his hand to the piano hanging on the other wall, and recommended it diligently. The gentleman's piano is here. You see that this piece of beechwood is made of beechwood, which was carefully built by a one-armed luthier in Hiang for 2 years. Although it is a little worse than the banana nunnery that the girl took away before, it can be given away. Zhang Xuaning. She looked at Lucien speechlessly. Lucien's ability to observe words and expressions was so powerful, he easily found that she seemed to be dissatisfied, so his eyes brightened a little, not satisfied. Zhang Xuning glanced at him and said truthfully, "Give it to young Master Xie." LV Xian. Lucien, who was about to use an ordinary piano to slap Zhang Xuning for a large sum of money, the courteous smile on his face almost immediately stiffened, and the hand that had just pointed to the piano that was priced at 5,000 taels was actually only worth 1,300 taels, and it was also frozen, and slowly took it back. He felt a mouthful of old blood in his throat. Pit Zhang Xuning is simple, after all, she can't see whether it is good or bad, but if this Zhang Qin is really sent to Xie, it doesn't matter if he has been a cow and a horse for the surname Xie all these years. If Xie sees that it is Zhang's Haikan, he will keep it and call him crying father and mother. Lucien looked at Zhang Xuning with a different gaze, only thinking about whether this girl was intentional or not. But whether it was intentional or not, the original profiteer's idea immediately faded completely. Lifting the curtain of the inner room, he put on a kind and gentle smile again, and said, "Please inside, I asked Tong'er to invite those pianos out." Not long after, Zhang Xuning took out 4,000 taels to buy a piano and came out of it. Lucien counted the silver tickets in his hand, but he was lamenting in his heart that he had earned half of the money, and when he wanted to send Zhang Xuning out in person, he couldn't help but be curious. The surname is Xie? No, Xie Juan's birthday is not here. Why did the girl suddenly remember to send the piano? Zhang Xuning held the piano obliquely and said lightly, "A teacher's kindness, a parting gift." Lucien's heart jumped, and he was stunned. Zhang Xuning bowed, turned the stairs, went downstairs, got into the carriage waiting on the side of the street, and went down the long street. This trip is to go directly to Xiefu. Chapter 179, The Fallen Piano. In the inner room behind the Qin Hall, Dayakan was dressed in blue and stood quietly in the shadows of the corner. Although he had no sense of existence, his eyes swept over the field from time to time, and especially frequently fell on the man who was sitting at the bottom of the big golden knife. The messy hair was tied up with hemp rope, and on this early summer day, he was dressed in a simple, even simple short brown, but he easily outlined a smooth body of muscles and a broad chest, and the eyebrows were like knife cuts, and there was a dangerous edge in the eyes that had faded away. It's not someone else, it's Men Yang who escaped in the Battle of Tongzhou. At present, there are smiling merchants with hunched backs, doctors with medical boxes, talented Qing scholars, and businessmen who are old and unsmiling. A Men Yang sat in the middle, not abrupt. It's just that the rest of the people were about to turn their heads to look at him when they said two words, vaguely a little jealous and a little confused. The man with the folding fan in his hand took a sip of tea, and after thinking about it again, he still couldn't help but say, "The matter in Tongzhou is so big, Mr. is not worried that the sect leader will tear his face with you and fight to the death. Siawei said lightly, what about the evidence? Doctor Yu frowned, then you next dash. Siawei gently lifted the lid of the teacup, put it down gently, knocked the ground with a soft snap, and said without waves, when Gongai Cheng arrives in the capital, he is the master of everything. If I forcibly rescue him in the Battle of Tongzhou, if I forcibly save him, will I not expose myself, and I may not be able to save him? In this case, I will naturally abandon the pawn and protect the car. He reported to Jinling, how could he blame me? At most, he suspected that I was standing by and watching, and by the way, he calculated a handful of public ceremonies. The love and righteousness in the world are unreliable, and the interests are the strongest. The situation in the capital is not good without me, and the public ceremony is gone, and thinking about getting rid of me is tantamount to cutting off my arm. It is better to be false and wronged, and then fight after the big thing is completed. Therefore, the top priority is to let him not have his hands free to deal with the situation in the capital, find something for him, and we can sit on the mountain and watch the tiger. Several people glanced at each other. The smiling merchant fiddled with a small drum in his hand, and after a few thoughts, he set his eyes on Men Yang, and faintly felt that Mr. Xie's plan should have something to do with this extremely vicious person. So he said, presumably Men Yashi can come in handy. Siawei turned his head and glanced at Men Yang. Men Yang didn't buy Siawei's account very much. He usually went alone, and he fled first when he saw that the situation was not good, and then the criminal department chased him and escaped. Who would have thought that Siawei's ears and eyes were more intelligent than the imperial court? Just when he thought he was safe, several knives were put on his neck, and he was tied here the night before. Today, he was brought in, and he listened to the words of this group of heavenly sect people, so he really didn't know what Siawei's intentions were. At this moment, he said, in the next reckless, I have no interest in your affairs. Siawei's patience with this person has been exhausted, and he said calmly, you finally escaped from the prison, you have no material desires, and you are not greedy for life and afraid of death. I think you should want to avenge your wife, right? Men Yang sneered, if Lao Tzu sees the circular machine, he will kill it. Either you kill me immediately, or let Lao Tzu go. Siawei didn't get angry when he heard this, but said, it's been a few years since you sent your wife to the ground, right? Men Yang suddenly got up, what do you mean? The corners of Siawei's eyes and eyebrows were indifferent, I won't kill you, but if you do my thing, then you won't be able to affect the soul. Please take the body of your deceased wife out of the coffin, find a place to hang it, and hang it. Several people in the heavenly sect did not dare to speak out. Men Yang was furious. He was as strong as a tiger, and he was about to snatch Siawei's neck as soon as he untied the strap on his arm, but the knife and chain behind him had already guarded against him, and before he could touch Siawei, he had already grabbed the opponent's claws, kicked out, and kicked this man who was a few points stronger than him backwards and knocked down the tea table. Smack! There was a sound of bounce on the arm covered by the sleeve robe, and when it was raised, it was actually a small crossbow tied to the arm, and the tip of the blue arrow was quenched with poison, aiming at Men Yang like a poisonous snake spitting out a letter. The Daikon man said little cruelly, and looked at him without moving. Siawei didn't put the scene in his eyes at all, and only said, if I don't kill you, it's just that I cherish my talents. If you can't be used by me, you won't be able to step out of this door today, and Siamao will practice what he says, and he will never lose his trust in others. If you don't believe me, try it. Men Yang's eyes were bloodshot like beasts, and he confronted Daikon. Outside the door, Jianshu hurriedly walked in, and he was not surprised to see the tense scene inside, so he only went to Siawei's side and lowered his voice to report a few words. Siawei was slightly stunned and said, how long have you been here? Jianshu said, when I first came, my subordinates wanted you to talk about things in the Qin Hall, so I asked her to wait in the Bishu Hall first. Both the piano hall and the wall reading hall are very places that people can set foot in. The wall reading hall is a study room. But Xie Wei didn't feel anything wrong when he heard it, and said, "I'll take a look." Everyone in the inner room didn't know what the sword book was about, and Xie Wei didn't explain anything to everyone, so he just went out by himself, so he left everyone here, and went out of the Qin Hall to the back wall to read the hall. The summer wood is overcast, and the cicadas are singing. There are 2 apricot trees planted in the window outside the wall reading hall. The flowering period is early in the season, and there are scattered green apricots on the branches, small, hidden under the leaves. Just a glance reminds people of the sour taste, and the mouth is full of relish. Zhang Xuning still returned to this place. On the north side is an empty wall. There is nothing on it. There is a kind of rigor under the cover of monotony, but it is a secret combination of the word wall reading, which is very lined with Xie Wei himself. I thought about it on the wall, and I didn't think about it 3 times a day. She only dared to look around, and did not dare to mess around with anything. It's just that Jianshu left first. She waited for a while and didn't see anyone, and looked at the apricot tree outside the window, but she couldn't help but tear off the palm and grow a small branch, even 2 leaves, with a small green apricot, put it in the palm of her hand. Very cute, a little lively in summer. Xie Wei walked in at this time. Zhang Xuning caught a glimpse of a shadow falling on the door out of the corner of her eye, and immediately put the green apricot on the edge of the window, turned around and saluted, and said goodbye. Xie Wei glanced at him, then at the window, but didn't say anything to her, only asked, "Why do you think of me here?" The chain was very heavy to hold, and it was placed on the table by Zhang Xuning soon after coming in. After Xie Wei finished saying this, he turned his eyes and saw it. The piano is also wrapped around the piano bag. Xie Wei's eyebrows moved slightly. Come to learn the piano. The corners of Zhang Xuning's lips curled and she was about to laugh. When she heard these 3 words, she almost stumbled, and hurriedly said, "No, no, no. It's just that I thought of Mr. Aiken, and I chose to see it in the secluded pavilion today, and I heard that this piano was excellent, so I came to offer it to Mr. Xie Wei's robe is snow white, and the abyss is mountainous." Standing in front of her and glancing at her, she took the initiative to take the piano and handed it over. Xie Wei said, "Being so obedient always makes people feel that you are not well-intentioned." As he spoke, he uncovered the piano bag. The fur-chopping piano, with a round head and a retracted double-arc waist, is an imitation of the Fuxi style, and the strings are reflected on the body, leaving a few faint shadows in the skylight. Gently raise your hand, and the sound of ring admiration gurgles out. Isn't this Lucien's Kunshan Qin? As soon as he tried it, he knew that it was the one he had asked Lu Zheyin in the past, but Lu Zheyin had a habit of being a traitor, hiding it and not giving it, so he had to make a high price. He didn't have to take the guqin, so he simply hung him to see how long he could hold it. Unexpectedly, it was sent by Ning Er today. Zhang Xuning said in her heart that she was indeed not well-intentioned, and she only hoped that she could leave a good impression on this Mr. Xie before leaving Beijing, and when she asked for something about the princess in the future, the other party could remember some old feelings and help 1 or 2. "It's just that of course I can't admit it," she said. "Since Fengchen Palace, I have been taught by Mr. Meng, learning the piano and learning literature, although I dare not explain the reason, but I also have good progress. The teacher's kindness is on top, and the students are vulgar and have nothing to repay, so they can only choose the piano to please. If Mr. doesn't like it, the student will be relieved to leave Beijing this time." Zheng. The ring finger gently hooked the strings, but it lost its accuracy and made a screeching sound. Zhang Xuning's cold hair shrugged. Xie Wei, who was standing in front of her, suddenly didn't move, only a little hot wind blew in from outside the window, stirring his snow-white clothes. She looked up and saw Siewei resting on the fingers curled up on the piano, and the face that dissolved the expression, a pair of deep eyes that looked at her silently. Wordless deterrence. Jiang Xuning didn't know why, she felt out of breath. She is wearing a smoky purple pleated skirt today, 2 strands of bangs hang down in front of the single screw, the icy blue agate earrings hang like a crescent moon on her snow-white earlobes, and a pair of rippling eyes under the willow leaf thin eyebrows, but at the moment she is a little uneasy. That strange feeling reappeared. Siewei listened to the cicadas outside, only to feel that there was a lot of noise, but he asked casually, "You want to leave Beijing?" Jiang Xunning's heartbeat was a little faster, and she came to thank her teacher in person, and then she said simply, she didn't plan to stay long, and she hurriedly buried her head when she heard the words, "Yes, there has been a turmoil in the capital recently, whether it is Yanlin or the eldest princess, they have all gone away." The student discussed with his father that he planned to go out of Beijing for a period of time to avoid right and wrong and distract himself, so he came to say goodbye to his husband today. Siewei didn't speak. Jiang Xuning became more and more nervous, her eyelids jumped frequently, and she was already a little panicked. "Thank you for your teaching, he will come to visit when he returns to Beijing, and he doesn't dare to disturb Mr. at the moment, so he will leave. The atmosphere is really wrong." She didn't dare to look up at Siewei's face, bowed down and saluted again, then retreated from Siewei's side and wanted to walk out of the door. Unexpectedly, when she stepped out of the door with her front foot, a hand stretched out from the door, and her slender 5 fingers tightly wrapped around her left wrist, and the force seemed to sink into her skin, giving people a real pain. At the same time, there was a bang sound of landing. Jiang Xuning was so frightened that she was almost dragged back, but she was facing Siewei's frozen and cold gaze at some point. He asked with great calm, "Where are you going?" Jiang Xuning only felt like she was in a nightmare when she heard these 4 words, and then she realized that Siewei's hands were empty. His gaze almost stiffened to the ground next to him. The Kunshan Gukan fell to the ground at some point. Broke a piano post. For a moment of quiet emptiness, the memory goes back to the old days when I was learning the piano. Jean fell. There was a loud bang in my head, as many as I could, and they all exploded. The dare to think, the unthinkable, the possible, the impossible, all rushed out, and the wind and waves, swallowing mountains and seas knocked her down. She finally knew where that strange feeling came from. Jiang Xuning was grabbed by his wrist, only to feel like a poisonous snake crawling up. A deep fear grabbed her whole person, making her tremble uncontrollably. Her voice trembled with her body, but there was still a faint hope. "Sir, please, please let me go." Siewei didn't glance at Qin, who fell at his feet, only stared at her, and repeated without ups and downs, "Where are you going?" Chapter 180, Ask Freedom. The calmer it is, the more thrilling it is. The noisy chirping of cicadas hides in the shadows of the trees, but it sets off the palpitating silence of the moment. Jiang Xuning didn't seem to hear anything, even the cicadas outside the window outside the door nearby. It seemed to be far away in the sky, only her own heartbeat was as fast as it was, and the pulse that came from the palm of her wrist was so clear and so terrifying. The wall reading hall is not as good as the piano hall. There are still people waiting for the Qin hall on weekdays, but no one in the wall reading hall dares to take a step closer easily, and at this moment, there is no one else at the door except for the 2 of them. Jiang Xuning had also thought about it in the past. What did Siewei think of himself? Disgusted, disliked. Either way, I never thought about this time. That's something she wouldn't think about and didn't dare to think about, and it was also a possibility that she had ruled out from the beginning. But Siewei broke it all. In her last life, she was really not a little girl who was unworldly and unobservant. If it weren't for Siewei's special person, she might not have noticed it today. Jiang Xuning clenched her fingers as hard as she could, so that she could barely control herself. The palm that clutched her wrist showed no intention of relaxing. Xie Wei didn't seem to have done anything out of the ordinary, still so indifferent, looked at her with his eyes, and said, "Is there anything wrong with staying in the capital?" She was shaking. Xie Wei didn't seem to notice it, and said in a faint voice, "The family doesn't dare to provoke you easily, there is Xiao Dingfei outside to accompany you to mess around, and even your sister who you are not used to seeing has been married. He will return to the capital in the future, and he should be happy to see you there." The princess went to totter and pro, exchanged news, the fastest in the court, and you should be the first to know in the capital. You can't stand the life at home, and another day I will move the country to add a women's school, and it is the same if you leave home to study, no one can criticize it. Why do you have to go? There is not a word of coercion and coercion. Even when he said this, there was still a mountain-high and foggy distance between his eyebrows and eyes, and he had no selfishness, all thinking about her. But it's like a meticulous net. Every time Xie Zhuan said a word, Jiang Xuning felt that this big net was tightening towards her. Little by little, it squeezed the space where she was standing, and the air she breathed made it difficult for her to struggle, almost suffocating. She tried her best to keep her calm, not daring to provoke him, and said, "Mr. looks down on the students used to be indulgent, if it weren't for the help of the husband, I am afraid that it would have caused a big disaster." Xie Wei said, "Then why not continue to indulge in nonsense?" Jiang Xuning tried to pull her hand back, but the hand holding her didn't move. Xie Wei looked at her and narrated very calmly, "You are the concubine of the Hubu squire, the companion of the eldest princess, the wife and sister of the king of Linzi, the playmate of Yan Lin, the backer of Xiao Dingfei, and my student. What are you afraid of?" Every word he said hit her sensitive nerves, and as soon as the words "my student" came out, the tense display in Jiang Xuning's mind finally broke with a buzz. Anyone in this world can. Only Xie Wei, it is not she who dares to be contaminated. At this moment, she is like a prey that has been forced into a dead end, facing the beast approaching step by step. She must open every sharp thorn on her body and tighten every corner of her body, so that she can muster up that little courage, open her reddish eyes, and say to him, "Let go of me." She didn't call sir anymore. The wisps of anger in Xie Wei's eyes finally quietly floated, but his voice was softer than Fang Cai, "Isn't Zhang Sha still there? Why do you want to leave the capital?" If this name was mentioned in the past, Jiang Xuning might have a little inhumane sweetness in her heart, but after saying it the day before yesterday, all this name could bring her was irreparable regret and unattainable sting. Xie Wei stepped on her sore foot. She began to struggle hard, glared at him, gritted her teeth and screamed, "What does it have to do with him? What a bad person I am, what a bad character, didn't my husband know it clearly? Where can a girl in the countryside be elegant? The capital is not the place where I should stay, every day here is like lying in a pot of oil, I can't live in peace for a day, and I never feel at ease. Why can't I leave? Every day is like lying in a pot of oil, not a day of peace, never a day of freedom." Xie Wei's eyelashes were pressed and he stared at her. But he felt that her posture of being a trapped beast was very ridiculous, and even disappointed him, and there was a cold pungency in her gentle tone, "Cowards think so. Ning you're not a child anymore, stop messing around." Jiang Xuning stretched out her hand to break his hand. He didn't move, he felt that she was so hysterical, avoiding him like a snake and scorpion, and treating him like a beast of prey, but he didn't know where he made her so afraid. At that moment, there was a bit of sadness. He lowered his voice and said softly, "Ning stay." Jiang Xuning's tears welled up in her eyes, "Let go of me." Xie Wei was stunned. The princess went to kiss. "I didn't do what I promised you, and I have to repay your kindness, I owe you my life. Jiang Xuning couldn't break free from him, and choked up, I don't want you to pay it back, I'm not rare. Xie Wei remembered a long time ago, the little girl who clearly hated him saw that he was sick and confused, and she burst into tears all day long. Stay by his side, afraid that he will die next to her, with a dead man, and want to go out to collect medicine, but afraid of the wild mandrills, and the nocturnal wolves. It was a day of heavy snow during the solar term. The cold in the mountains is getting colder, and the snow is drifting in the high places. The little girl cried all night and was tired of crying. He woke up in a daze, but no one was seen in the morning. It wasn't until the middle of the day that I saw a white shadow walking in from outside the cave. She was covered in cold, her head and shoulders were covered with snow, her lips were bruised, she had picked herbs from nowhere, and she trembled to beat the flints. But the branches of the tree were soaked that day, and she couldn't light it, but she didn't cry, but bit by bit the herb and put it in a broken bowl that she had picked up from a grave somewhere. His knife stuck in a crack in the stone. It took her a long time to pull it out, and she shuddered and scratched a line on her wrist, and the bright red blood gushed out, winding and falling into the corner of the broken pottery bowl, mixed with the dark green herbs, and became a thick inky purple. Then he brought the bowl to his lips. The girl by Shenzhen's face was not half bloody, and she coaxed him with a crying voice, there was a very powerful doctor in Zhuangzi, and he used this recipe to save the dead, you just drink the medicine. How can a dead person be saved? Most of them are swaggering and deceiving magic sticks. He still can't tell if it was his dream or not. Only the extremely astringent herbs mixed with the bitter smell of rust when blood flowed from time to time from the depths of memory. Later, he burned it, and it seemed to be fine. But the little girl was confused. He went out to explore the road and find some food, but she always tugged at his sleeve, drowsy, and complained dreamily, I knew that you would have to go by yourself when you were ready. As a last resort, he softened his heart and carried her 1 foot deep and 1 foot shallow. But she still thinks that he is not a good person and will leave her behind. He tore off a narrow strip of his dirty robe, tied one end to her wrist and the other to his own, and told her, now I am tied to you, and no one can go first, I am here. Her dream slowly stopped. Xie Wei recalled that it was really the craziest and most stupid time he had in more than 20 years. There seems to be such a belief in the dark. I believe that in such a desperate situation, we can still find a glimmer of life. There are no pianos and books, no knives and swords, no heavenly religion, no court, no life experience, and no revenge, only the vast world and 2 people who want to live. But Jiang Xuning said, don't want him back, she is not rare. There is disgust hidden in the coldness, more like when I occasionally met her in the capital a few times later. Xie Wei felt a cramping pain in his chest. The pain came so quickly and so unfamiliarly that before he could distinguish it, he felt a burst of dizziness and trance, and only said, it doesn't matter if you don't want to, there is everything in the capital. Jiang Xuning had been driven to the brink of collapse, and shouted at him like a ruthless person, there is everything, except freedom. Xie Wei said, why don't you understand? Jiang Xuning said, let go. Xie Wei said to her word by word, there is no real freedom in the world at all. Even if you escape to the ends of the earth, as long as you have a bond in your heart, you will always be trapped in a cage. After all, you have to come back. Most of the truth in the world is too cruel, wrapped in layers of sharp thorns, which not only do not enter people's ears, but pierce the listener to erect a whole body of defense and protect himself tightly inside. That fear has not diminished, but has intensified. Jiang Xuning didn't know whether she was more afraid of Xie Wei, or more afraid of his words, and finally couldn't bear it. She couldn't break the palm that was clamping her own, so she buried her head and bit it deeply. Severe pain came from the back of his hand, almost penetrating into the bone marrow, but Siawei was still unwilling to let go. Looking at her, there was even a faint hint of pleading in his voice, almost paranoid. Jiang Xuning, don't go. It hurts to the extreme, and the fingers spasm. Jiang Xuning still broke free from him in the end. Her chest rose and fell, her eyes opened angrily, and she stepped back, as if she wanted to refute him, as if she wanted to tell herself, nonsense. It's all nonsense. She didn't have time to clean up any of her thoughts, and she didn't want to think deeply. And so he fled. Run away. That night, she took the carriage that had been prepared in the house, took her bags, and went out of the capital with mountains and rivers, and went to Shuzhong for 3,000 miles. Siawei's hands were empty, and blood was dripping from the back of his hand near the tiger's mouth. He stood inside the door and didn't chase a single step. That low threshold, like a chasm, tore him apart from the outside world. No one could cross, others could not enter, and he could not get out. When Lucien came to the wall reading hall, it was already twilight. Jianshu stood outside, not daring to enter. He looked inside along the door, only to see that it was dim, and the piano that Jiang Xuning had taken from the secluded pavilion was lying on the ground, shattering a piano pillar, and the broken strings were curling like a green silk. And Siawei stood in front of the wall in the shadows, and he didn't move for a long time, like a rotten tree. A small green apricot was resting on the edge of the window, and the crimson light of the setting sun penetrated through the back of the verdant leaves, and the unripe fruit was embedded in the branches, and I don't know who broke it. Jiang Xuning should have been here. When Lucien saw this, he didn't dare to step inside. Siawei turned his head slowly, and saw them, as if nothing had happened. There was no difference on his face, and said, "You came just in time, let's catch up with the discussion." Lucien saw his hand. Siawei walked past the broken chain and walked in the direction of the chain cutting hall, thinking that everyone should have waited for a long time. Lucien and Jianshu were still standing in place. Jianshu was confused, and he didn't understand. Why don't you force it to stay? Lucien looked back at the broken piano. After being silent for a long time, he rarely stopped smiling, and said slowly, Xiejuan is not that kind of person.